A Stitch in Time by Rita Pomade. Title sequence. Exterior, front, three-story house, East End, Montreal, late afternoon. Traffic noise, schoolgirls giggling, and a baby crying are heard in the background. A teenage boy glides by on rollerblades carrying the title of the film. A group of girls in school uniforms watch him. A young woman strolls by pushing a baby carriage. Credits are on the side of the carriage. People hurry in both directions, carrying grocery bags or briefcases with credits written on some of them. A man dressed as a clown hands a flyer to a pedestrian, which he throws away. The flyer floats down the basement steps of the house and lands in front of the door. The last credit is on it. A foot comes down on the rumpled flyer. It belongs to a small, angry man in a gray suit and fedora hat. The man, who is the landlord, bangs angrily on the door. No answer. He bangs again. He turns and leaves, a scowl on his face, hands in fists. Humming and mumbling are heard from behind the door. The door opens a crack, and Mary, a heavy-set woman of a certain age, peers out and looks both ways. She lumbers out with her calico cat, Rags, carrying a number of empty bags tied around her waist. A larger bag, thrown over her shoulder, is filled with quilts. Exterior, outside Mary's house, her street, late afternoon. Mary constantly mumbles to Rags while she scans the street for bits of discarded cloth to use for her quilts. The lost or cast-off items tell Mary the stories of their demise as they fly into her bags. Mary emotes approving or disapproving sounds depending on what they tell her. As she walks the street in search of homeless cloth, she makes sounds of pleasure when she passes people she knows. A man rides by on a unicycle. They wave at each other. A woman floats by carrying flowers. She gives Mary one that she inserts into her battered hat. Mary finds a coin on the street and is elated. She shows it to Rags, who's not impressed. She shrugs her shoulders and puts it in the violin case of a busker playing the violin. He smiles at her. She passes a mime standing motionless, holding an open umbrella. They make a slight, solemn bow to each other. Exterior, the main, late afternoon to evening. Mary finds a broken kite leaning against a street lamp. She picks up the kite, and it changes from drab to brilliant colors. It moves forlornly out of her hands and floats into her bag. A child is heard crying in the background. Sympathy sounds come from Mary. She looks down at Rags, who looks back up as the two commiserate. Mary picks up a bra from the gutter. It changes from drab to brilliant colors. She holds it by a strap and looks at it. Angry voices are heard in the background of a man and woman fighting. The car door is slammed. Mary sucks in her breath and emits a shocked sound. The bra jerks out of her hand and zigzags into one of her bags. The fur stands up on Rag's back. They look at each other with big eyes. Mary finds an old t-shirt in a dumpster. It goes from drab to brilliant colors. She holds it up to show Rags. The t-shirt leaves her hands and moves about as though playing hockey. Mary's very excited. She clasps her hands as she watches the movements. Rags jumps up onto a bench for a better look. Wild cheering is heard in the background, then cat calls. Mary makes excited sounds and then expels a disappointed "oh." Her face falls. She looks very sad. The t-shirt crumples up and drifts into her bag. Rags watches it float into the bag. Mary spots a flattened glove by the side of the curb. She picks up the stiff glove by its thumb and studies it. It turns from drab to brilliant color. Plaintive sighs of frustration are heard in the background. Mary makes an indifferent gesture as though this loss isn't a big deal. The glove jerks out of her hand, annoyed by her lack of sympathy. It makes a few loops and dives into a bag. Mary shrugs her shoulders and smiles at Rags. Exterior, the main, night. Mary and Rags start their journey home. She sighs deeply at the sight of a man sitting alone on a bench. She smiles at him and tips her hat. He looks at her but doesn't smile back. Mary sees an old man sleeping in a bus shelter. She reaches into the bag over her shoulder and brings out a quilt that floats out of her hands and gently folds over him as though by its own will. She cocks her head to the side, pauses a moment, and smiles down at Rags. Exterior, Mary's street, night. As Mary walks down her street, she hums to herself. Sometimes she giggles at a private joke. Every once in a while, she looks down at Rags as if to share the joke. She spots a teenage girl huddled on a step near her house. She again produces a quilt that floats over the girl. The girl pulls the quilt tightly around her shoulders in her half-sleep. Interior, Mary's room, morning. Mary and Rags are asleep on a metal bed frame. They are wrapped together under one of her beautiful quilts. Outside, traffic sounds are heard. A car horn honks aggressively. The noise fades into the background as the shuffling feet and children's voices become louder. The outside sounds awaken Mary and Rags. Mary yawns and stretches. Rags slips out from under the quilt and also stretches. Mary looks down at him, smiles broadly, and strokes him lovingly. She makes gratifying sounds to welcome in the new day, humming to herself and chattering to Rags as she shuffles to the center of the room to turn a light bulb hanging from a long wire in the middle of the room. The bulb casts a dim light on a group of wooden crates. She and Rags sit down on 2 of the crates to eat breakfast, a shared can of sardines. She carefully divides the tin and makes smacking sounds and murmurs of appreciation. Rags listens attentively, nodding to the sound of Mary's voice. Interior, Mary's room, afternoon. People are heard on the street and in the distance, the sound of someone playing spoons. Mary hums to herself the song she hears from the street. She sits on the same crate where she ate her sardines, working on one of her quilts. A thin shaft of sunlight pierces through a high, small window, revealing a dingy, neglected cellar in great need of repair. Quilts and wall hangings in scintillating colors are strewn all about the room. The quilted work seems to give off its own soft light, like precious gems, out of range of the shaft of sunlight. Mary continues to hum, makes appreciative sounds as she examines her work. Daylight starts to fade, but Mary continues to work on her quilt. The pieces place themselves as she sews away, smiling to herself. From time to time, she shows Rags a section she particularly likes. Rags looks, blinks, and for the most part languishes on a lovely little quilted pad. There's a loud, persistent banging on the door. At first, Mary ignores the knocking, but it looks as though the banging will break down the door. She leaves her sewing to answer. The landlord faces Mary as she opens the door. He's a gray little man in a gray suit with a very red face. He shakes his fist at her and makes a gesture that shows he wants the rent. Mary hands the landlord a piece of colored cloth and smiles. The landlord looks disgusted, throws it down, and walks away. Mary looks confused and then smiles. She picks up the cloth and ties it around Rags' neck, bandana style. Rags purrs and struts for her, head high and tail in the air. Mary picks him up and holds him against her chest. While still in the doorway, she hears an angry male voice. The landlord has returned with a policeman. He points to the street. Mary goes to gather her quilts, but as she does, they float off the walls, off the crates, even off the floor, and out onto the street. Exterior, outside Mary's house, late afternoon. Excited voices, festive sounds, laughing and shouting fill the street. Happy people scoop up Mary's creations. A quilt moves towards the landlord, but suddenly jerks away and wraps around the policeman instead. He appears enchanted and floats away with the quilt around his shoulders, forgetting Mary. The landlord looks at Mary and is furious. He watches from the doorway as she gathers up her belongings and delivers them into an old shopping cart. She leaves the basement room head down with her few possessions and Rags piled into the cart. Mary hears a loud bang and jumps. The landlord has slammed the door behind her and puts a big padlock on it. Exterior, small park, evening. Traffic noises are heard. Mary sits on a park bench with Rags at her side and the shopping cart in front of her. It starts to rain. She covers Rags and the cart with a large green plastic bag that's been cut open to lie flat. Exterior, small park, night. In the background are the sounds of car wheels driving through puddles on wet road. Mary and Rags sit in the dark, huddled under the plastic, wet, alone, and dejected. Exterior, street, night. A van that picks up the homeless stops. A man gets out. He takes Mary, Rags, and the cart into the van and drives off. Exterior, entrance of shelter, night. A big door opens that permits Mary to enter, but it shuts Rags out. Mary goes after him, but the matron points to a sign that says no animals allowed. Mary tries to leave, but is steered down a long hallway by the matron. Interior, shelter, cafeteria, bright lights. Mary is led into a room full of women who are sitting at long tables eating. She's given a tray and pushed into line to be served. She sits with the tray but doesn't eat. She holds in her hand a can of sardines that she always shares with Rags at this hour. Big tears fall on the can. Another woman takes Mary's tray. When Mary doesn't stop her, She hands her a sweet roll from her coat pocket. Mary mechanically drops it into one of the bags in her shopping cart. Interior shelter dormitory. Mary sits on one of the many dormitory beds and tries to sew a quilt, but the pieces won't hold together. The lights go out and the women go to sleep. Mary sits in the dark with her head down and stares at the can of sardines in her lap. She listens to the sounds of the women snoring. She hears a tapping at the window and looks up to see Rags. Elated, she jumps up and silently makes her way to the window. With some effort, she manages to open it a bit for Rags to squeeze through. They share the sardines. Interior shelter outside dormitory. Rags leads Mary out of the dark room, down the stairs, and through the long corridor to the front door. A watchman is sleeping, his head on the desk by the door. A large ring of keys hangs from his belt. Mary and Rags sneak past him, but the door is locked. The two nod at each other. Mary hides behind a column. Rags starts meowing very loud and runs wildly about the room, jumping from object to object and onto the watchman, who wakes with a start. The watchman gets a broom and chases Rags from one place to another. He opens the front door in an attempt to push Rags out, and just when it looks as though Rags is going to leave, he takes off in the opposite direction with the watchman behind him. Mary uses the distraction to slip out the door with her shopping cart. When Rags sees that she's out, he dashes through the door, and the watchman slams it behind him. Exterior night street. With unbounded joy, Mary and Rags head for their old neighborhood. They hear sounds of a struggle and a tipped-over garbage pail. Near their street, they see two shadows running from an alley. They enter to see what happened and find the landlord lying on the ground. Mary sits up the trembling man and props him against a wall. She takes out one of her quilts and kneels beside him. This time, it wraps around the landlord. He looks at Mary, who smiles at him. She suddenly becomes beautiful before his eyes. Mary takes out the sweet roll from her bag and offers it to the landlord. He takes it and breaks off a piece for Rags, who turns up his nose and walks away. They both laugh. The landlord eats the roll, snug in Mary's quilt. Shortly after, Rags returns with the landlord's wallet in his mouth. The landlord opens it, but his money is gone. He shrugs his shoulders and smiles at Mary. She helps the landlord up, and in doing so, the quilt opens to reveal his gray suit, now filled with color. Exterior winter, landlord's house, where Mary lives, morning. Traffic sounds, honking horns, and children laughing are heard in the background. The house is brightly painted. There's a beautiful sign on the building that says, Mary's House of Magical Quilts. Interior, Mary's basement, transformed afternoon. The noise of people at a large gathering is heard. Drinks being poured, platters rattling, talking, laughing. Somewhere, a violin is being tuned. Rags sits on several cushions eating a baked fish on a china plate. His scarf is still around his neck. People are eating, drinking, and milling about. Everyone from the neighborhood has come to the gathering. The busker from the street in a quilted jacket is tuning his violin. The man on the unicycle in a quilted top hat is moving about with wine glasses on a tray. The mime in a quilted vest stands absolutely still at the entrance and serves as a coat rack. The spoon player takes a seat in the corner. His spoon's at the ready. He's wearing a quilted scarf. Even the lonely man from the bench has come. The flower lady hands him a quilted rose, and he smiles for the first time. In the midst of the guests are Mary and the landlord holding hands. She is dressed in a long quilted dress with a quilted African headdress, and he is wearing quilted tails. In the background are sounds of music, laughter, and light-hearted gaiety. The policeman in a quilted winter hat with ear flaps blows his whistle, and all the guests raise their glasses to the couple and cheer. The wedding party gets into formation. The old man from the bus shelter, dressed in an elegant quilted suit, stands before the couple, holding an old tattered Bible in his hands. The flower lady from the street floats over with a bouquet of flowers and hands it to Mary. The policeman and teenage girl from the street, who's dressed in a quilted miniskirt, stand to one side as witnesses. Rags stands to the other side with a set of shimmering wedding rings made of light around his upright tail. The old man looks for a moment at the Bible he's holding, puts it under his arm, and takes from his pocket a fragment of wrinkled paper from which he solemnly mumbles. He smiles at the girl from the street. She nods and removes the rings of light from Rag's tail and hands them to Mary and the landlord. The rings of light expand to encircle everyone in the room. "Oh, How We Danced on the Night We Were Wed" is playing on the violin. Mary and the landlord start to dance to the music, going round and round. The old man dances with the young girl. The flower lady dances with the mime. Everyone joins in going round and round to the music as though floating through the light. Exterior, the same building, night. The violinist continues to play the same song, but the sound becomes more distant. Though dark outside, light can be seen through all the windows of the house. A few stars are twinkling, and a soft snow is falling. Quilts drift out of the windows and glide over the rooftops of Montreal, swaying to the rhythm of the music. They gently fall here and there on all the street people, huddled alone and cold throughout the city.